Okay, folks, let's talk about the Middle East today and what the United States is planning. If you thought Trump's trade war was terrible, this step will take it to another level. It is generally known that the Trump White House dislikes Iran, and this time he intends to strike Iran's economic lifeline. But there's a significant problem. It'll irritate America's main opponent. In an interview, Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, acknowledged the unthinkable. The United States is planning to restrict Iranian oil shipments by nearly 90%. We are committed to bringing the Iranians back to 100,000 barrels a day of oil exports. This is more than simply a threat. It is a pledge from the United States that Iran's oil sector is going to be destroyed. Iranian exports have increased under the Biden administration. It presently produces more than 1.6 million barrels per day. However, there is a major problem. It also poses a direct danger to China. Bessent is at risk since this is an existential move for Beijing's economy. Aside from purchasing cheap Russian gas, China has a fairly diverse energy mix. They buy oil and LNG from throughout the world, and Iran is a big provider to the Chinese economy. China imports more than 90% of Iran's oil exports. When Tehran sends 10 barrels to the globe, 9 barrels of oil wind up at a Chinese refinery. So when Scott Bessent discusses reducing Iran's exports, he also mentions reducing Chinese manufacturing. China is bold in purchasing sanctioned energy, which is why their businesses are so competitive. Affordable oil and gas are part of China's supply chain network and are essential to its survival. Let us not forget about the current terrain in which China operates. The Western world is extremely unfriendly to their businesses. In reality, the U.S. has declared an economic war against Chinese exports. Trump has put an extra 10% duty on China, and unlike Canada and Mexico, the duties remain in effect. And this will target $525 billion in Chinese exports to the United States. While this directly affects U.S. consumers, it will also have an impact on exports. Many Chinese exports now face tariff rates of 50% or higher, forcing firms to decrease prices or redirect shipments away from the U.S. to other markets. Revenue and profitability might suffer a significant drop. China must fire on all cylinders to make its exports even more competitive, which includes ensuring that vital inputs, particularly energy, are inexpensive. Bessent's proposal to penalize Iranian oil also includes hurting China, as he stated during a Senate hearing. So an energy war is not a myth, it is coming. So Bessent's idea is fairly simple. Deprive the Iranian economy of money by slashing oil exports through sanctions policy. Since the U.S. cannot directly regulate Iran's output without destroying its oil infrastructure, sanctions are the next best option. Bessent has placed sanctions on a multinational network that transports Iranian oil to China. Iran earns more than $3 billion per month from supplying petroleum to Beijing alone, and the U.S. wants to reduce that money. So, if ships dare to transfer Iranian oil to China, they may face punishment. Assets might be taken and separated from SWIFT. Worst of all, Chinese banks may face penalties. The United States is walking a fine line because attacking China's financial industry is the last thing you want to do. Since 2020, Iran's oil output has been growing. The Biden administration imposed a slew of restrictions on Iranian oil, but output increased from around 2 million barrels per day to 3.3 million, and it is still rising. The U.S. enforcement system is now ineffective. Iran maintains a vast network of shadow boats, similar to how Russia transports oil. It is difficult to track down each ship and determine the origin of every crude supply. If Bessent intends to impose the sanctions, he will have to target China. Punishing Chinese refineries is useless. Thus, the only logical target would be Chinese banks. However, even the United States would face serious consequences. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, buying almost 12 million barrels per day. Oil is a global market, and China will not starve. They have a large network of suppliers, and will readily cover the shortage. The problem here is how much Beijing would have to pay and how this will affect crude prices. Russia is China's largest crude supplier, accounting for more than 2.2 million barrels per day. Supplies from Malaysia and Iraq have also surged. China will just import more from these nations. If Iranian oil is sanctioned, China will purchase more oil from a narrower pool of supplies, and now global prices will climb, harming both the EU and the United States. There's a reason why China prefers Iranian energy. The savings they receive are really big. In 2023, China saved more than $10 billion by purchasing oil from nations under Western sanctions. This comprises Russian crude as well as Iranian oil. Beijing is not worried about U.S. sanctions. Thus, they are willing to buy from these countries. It is one of the primary reasons China can outperform the rest of the world in manufacturing. Now, this goes much beyond simply burning oil for power. Oil is a very versatile input for the whole Chinese supply chain. A barrel of crude oil may be processed into several different products: diesel for vehicles, jet fuel for flights, and fuel oil for container ships. Petrochemicals used to create tires and plastics are also derived from crude oil. Chinese items are cheaper overall because of the low cost of Iranian crude. It is a major reason why China would respond if the U.S. sanctions Iran. And Beijing's response here is fairly predictable. Trump's approach to this economic war is obvious. He is weaponizing the U.S. consumer market by placing tariffs on all countries, including China. However, that is a really brutal instrument that harms your own customers. Beijing is more nuanced. They are not interested in hurting their own people, yet they are the intended targets. And that is why we are seeing crucial export prohibitions to the United States. The United States now seeks to reshore important industries such as semiconductors and solar production. But guess who controls the resources Trump requires? It is China. Take rare earths as an example. China accounts for 74% of imports, including 64% of bismuth, 54% of germanium, and more than 50% of gallium. All three are required to produce semiconductor chips. So you can understand the dilemma the United States confronts. Why do you suppose Scott Bessent traveled all the way to Ukraine for $500 billion in rare earths? Because that is a major weakness in U.S. industries. If Trump imposed sanctions on Iranian oil, China would respond by sanctioning crucial resources. And this will make his goal to reshore industries much more improbable. Yes, Trump can slash corporate taxes. The United States is also energy self-sufficient. But if you don't even have the raw ingredients to create the item, what's the sense of having factories in the United States? In December, China had already outlawed germanium, gallium, and antimony. These are industrial and military metals, and China excels at this tie-for-tat trade conflict. While the United States can restrict chip shipments to China, Beijing will simply refuse to allow U.S. businesses to manufacture the chips in the first place. It's all quite ironic. However, it is important to recognize that the U.S. has a larger purpose in mind when it comes to limiting Iranian shipments to China. Making Iran destitute again is not the primary purpose. Bessent is attempting to safeguard the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, and the petrodollar system is critical here. The United States wants the world to buy energy exclusively in dollars, and China is making things extremely difficult. Bessent understands that the world, especially the French, is weary of the dollar system. They are fed up with U.S. sanctions and being punished. Most of these nations, particularly those in the EU, cannot do anything, but China can. Beijing, the world's largest oil importer, is already de-dollarizing the oil trade. We only need to look at China and Russia. Since 2022, Russia has been exporting more than $10 billion worth of oil and gas per month. By late 2023, 100% of orders had been paid for in Chinese RMB. In reality, Russia is selling its commodities to other countries for Chinese money. Russia is eager to adopt the RMB since China's economy is so large, and that is why the U.S. wants to restrict Iranian oil exports to China because dollars are not used to settle transactions between the two countries. I absolutely do not believe Iran and China are paying in dollars. Iran ships the oil to Beijing, and China pays them in RMB, their own local currency. Everything comes down to the dollar and the United States' frantic attempt to maintain its dominion. It supports the entire economy. And why do you believe Trump threatened BRICS with a 100% tariff? This is a dead giveaway. The U.S. economy is currently experiencing a historic debt crisis. The debt-to-GDP ratio is at 101% currently. The quantity of money outstanding already exceeds the whole economy. However, by 2054, this figure will have risen to approximately 170% of GDP, surpassing the record reached during World War II. The United States cannot afford for countries not to acquire debt. We are in a position when a lack of demand might drive up rates and make interest payments even more unsustainable. The simplest fundamental strategy to increase demand is to make the dollar more useful. According to Besant, he wants Iran's oil exports to decrease while U.S. oil exports increase. And when the U.S. sells its petroleum, they will undoubtedly demand payment in dollars. It is not contentious. Everything is hidden in plain sight. Besant has made it quite plain. Even a blind monkey can see this now. When Scott Besant took over, he promised 3 things to the U.S. economy with his 3-3-3 plan. Now that seems pretty ugly, but the nuances are key. He intends to increase U.S. oil output by at least 3 million barrels per day. The goal is not only to increase income, but also to reclaim market share for U.S. dollar transactions. And by hitting Iran, he can kill 3 birds with 1 stone. It reduces Iran's revenue. It inhibits China's de-dollarization efforts and dollarizes the world. On the surface, it appears to be a really good idea. However, it is still a huge risk. Besant may win this battle and reduce Iran's oil shipments by 90%, but China will retaliate. During the Munich meeting, Wang Yi pledged that Beijing would respond to America's bullying methods, and that the tariffs would not go unpunished. Cutting China's oil supplies is not a wise decision. You're playing with fire. And if Beijing decides to put yet another important embargo on the U.S. economy, it might harm critical industries. Now, Besant may give the dollar a few more years of life in return for an industrial, manufacturing, and inflation crises. But tell me what you think. Is Besant really going to risk with China? Will he back down and leave Iran alone? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to like and subscribe as we navigate these tumultuous times.